Welcome to War Room, the official podcast of the U.S. Army War College online journal, graciously supported by the Army War College Foundation. Please join the conversation at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. We hope you enjoy the program.
Make sure not to miss a single episode and subscribe to A Better Peace, the War Room podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of the U.S. Army War College, U.S. Army, or Department of Defense.
Greetings and welcome to A Better Peace. My name is Tom Galvin. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Command Leadership and Management at the U.S. Army War College, and I'm also a faculty instructor with the Carlisle Scholars Program. And today I'm here with two Carlisle scholars who have undertaken a project about the defense of Taiwan. And the interesting question here is, what happens if there is a cross-strait invasion? How would it unfold, and how would Taiwan defend itself? And most importantly, what should Taiwan be doing now that might be different in order to ensure their maximum preparedness? Two of our scholars had undertaken this as one of their advanced studies projects, and they're here in the studio to talk about it. So if you'll please introduce yourselves.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Hsieh from Taiwan's Army.
Lieutenant Colonel Pete Roongsang, U.S. Army Foreign Area Officer.
Okay. And welcome. And I'd like to first turn to you, Jay, to go ahead and talk about why did you set out to do this study, and what is it that interests you about this?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. As an Army officer from Taiwan, I see a real opportunity to leverage a defense strategy curriculum to study and connect with the China Land Power Study Center, the research to focus on the critical gap in current study, the PLA landing operation, which Taiwan aims to counter through protracted warfare, defense in depth, and resilience strategies.
Okay, and as a Taiwanese officer, I could understand your interest in doing this. Now, when you reached out to the China Land Power Study, who are they anyway?
So we reached out to Dr. Jack Rinaldi. He's a very proficient, very knowledgeable about China land power studies, focus on how the China studied counter asymmetric warfare from the lesson learned from Ukraine warfare.
Okay. So why don't we go ahead and start with just discussing the situation? And I'll just kind of ask the question, let's say that the People's Liberation Army establishes a beachhead. What happens?
Yeah, so this project, we are specifically focused on the post-landing phase, which is from after landing, established lodgement, force build-up, and force breakout. So this project is focused on from the breakout on the way to People's Liberation Army achieve strategic end. So these are the area of focus for our studies. So we will focus on how the Taiwan is preparing itself, not only military, but also societal preparations in terms of a whole of society resilience, and how we leverage the lesson learned from Ukraine warfare to integrate asymmetric warfare capability into our defense to better prepare ourselves in this phase of operations. And this phase of operations is also the understudies areas.
Okay. So how is Taiwan preparing for that inland fight, and what are some of the key changes that we're seeing in their defense posture?
Yeah, how Taiwan is prepared for the landing fight. So from the study, I actually noticed that since the 2020s, Taiwan has been conduct systematic approach to prepare itself for the inland fight. So the policies regarding to reserve reform, conscription redesign, and also the whole of society defense resilience committees are all focused on the mechanism, the integration of the military and the civil.
So let me turn to you, Pete. Now, what interested you in this project, and why did you join on?
Yeah, so as a Army Foreign Area Officer, very familiar with working with partners, specifically in the Indo-Pacific, and what better opportunity to work with an officer from Taiwan on a real world problem set that Taiwan faces, a potential cross-strait invasion. But from a foreign area officer, U.S. Army standpoint, I wanted to look at the ways in which the United States was conducting security assistance, security cooperation with Taiwan. What are we doing currently, and how can we improve the processes and the way in which we look at the capabilities we are supporting Taiwan building on the island?
Okay, and how do you see the challenges that the PLA currently presents in terms of doing a cross-strait invasion? Because they're obviously adapting their capabilities to be able to establish this beachhead. I mean, they're not standing still, right?
Right, correct. That's a great question, Tom. Specifically, our project looked at what happens after they presumably, or we assume that they're able to establish a lodgment on the beachhead in Taiwan. And we specifically look at the phase in which the People's Liberation Army is garnering combat power in order to conduct a ground assault, essentially to seize Taipei, seize key urban terrain, and to seize critical infrastructure on Taiwan. And so the theory of victory that we were looking at in terms of Taiwan was the ability to either deny or to degrade the People's Liberation Army from achieving those objectives. We assume that the People's Liberation Army would want to achieve those objectives as soon as possible on Taiwan in order to avoid potential sanctions kicking in, as well as to avoid potential third-party intervention of their military operation.
Okay. So now that we've kind of covered the background and the situation, why don't we turn to the discussion about how Taiwan is currently prepared for this? Jay, could you give me an overview of the Taiwan's Whole of Society Resilience Program and why it is important?
Thank you, Tom. Before I talk about Whole of Society Resilience Program, I will talk about all the way to the beginning since the 2020s, how the policy in place to drive the build-up of resilience. So those policies reflect ongoing effort to strengthen the whole of society resilience with a systematic approach yielding significant organizational impact at the national level. Since 2022, three major policies have driven the transformation. The first, the strengthening policy on the reserve component initiative. The second one is the strengthening on people's defense military force restructure plan. The third, the whole of society defense committee. The strengthened reserve components initiative established the all-out defense mobilization agency and increased reserve brigades. The strengthening on people's defense plan extend conscript service to 1 year for male born after 1st January 2025. Also restructuring forces into main battle units, garrison troops, reserve and civil defense systems. Last, the whole of society defense resilience committee chaired by President Lai is shifting away stockpiling, stop taking to validation, ensuring the readiness not only good on paper, but also can be able to ensure the mechanism in place is effective in the battlefield.
Okay, so Taiwan is already undertaking significant changes on the basis of recognizing its current limitations of capability. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. While I'm doing the project on this, I realized that Taiwan has this systematic approach, driven layer by layer, starting by reserve military only, and drive all the way to test the civil military integration. So that's why our President Lai, he personally chaired the whole of society defense resistance committee to ensure the readiness and to validate the mechanisms are effective.
Okay. So let me turn to you, Pete. And since we're talking about the background and context, can you give me an overview of U.S. security assistance with Taiwan and why it is important in this matter?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Tom. As prescribed by the Taiwan Relations Act, the United States provides defense articles and services to Taiwan for them to maintain sufficient self-defense capacity. However, in recent years, the U.S. has focused security assistance on asymmetric capability development. So you'll hear a lot of discussion on supporting Taiwan's development of a Porcupine strategy of having large stockpiles of more lethal, smaller, survivable platforms and weapon systems on the island. So the current U.S. Policy towards security assistance to Taiwan has been characterized by more asymmetric capabilities such as Javelin missiles, drones, also the Harpoon coastal defense missile system. These are some of the asymmetric capabilities that could help provide defense to Taiwan in case of a People's Liberation Army invasion. Several mechanisms exist from a U.S. security cooperation standpoint to provide those systems to Taiwan, from foreign military sales to defense commercial sales, utilizing presidential drawdown authorities. There's also the new Taiwan Security Cooperation Initiative within the National Defense Authorization Act of 2025. These are all different mechanisms on how the United States is working to provide, with a sense of urgency, capabilities to Taiwan for them to be able to provide their own defense.
Why do we call it a porcupine strategy?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Tom. I think the imagery of the porcupine makes sense. It resonates with a lot of with a lot of our listeners. The porcupine strategy originally was kind of coined or devised by a Taiwan admiral who was the chief of the general staff. But it really promotes trying to come up with more lethal, smaller, more cost-effective, well-distributed, and easier to use weapon systems in order to defend against a numerically and potentially a better equipped military. So just imagine a porcupine out there. You would want to avoid to touch him because he's well armed with these quills, which would lend to its defense.
Okay, I appreciate that. So with all of these tools in place, Jay, you already mentioned that the Taiwan is doing a lot of organizational change, and I guess the question is, how effective is it, and what do you think may be some of the shortfalls that you identified as part of your research?
Yes, Tom. The effectiveness of a transformation that take a time to realize at a scale. So let's continue. We need to validate the mechanism to ensure the effectiveness. I will pick up two examples of ongoing change right now, which you need time to realize at the scale. The first one is a reserve reform at the recall training implementation. The new training plan extends from 5 to 7 days to 2 weeks, but with a training capacity, equipment, and the number we can recall to fully implement 2 weeks, they still need time. So by 2025, there will be only 50% of a recall will have a conduct 2 weeks training. On the other hand, for conscripts, so right now extend the conscripts time from 4 months to 12 months. By 2027, we are able to train up to 50% of the conscript male with a new 1-year training plan.
Okay. So that entails, when you think about reserve recall going from essentially 1 week to 2 weeks, and you said 4 months to 12 months for conscripts, that's a significant increase in requirements for what? Facilities, training personnel. So how is that being done?
Yes, definitely. So for First of all, about mobilization focus on recall training. Those recall training will not be realized if you don't have enough cadres. So a lot of reserve Type 1, Type 2 brigade, they are expand their cadre force to enable them have a capacity to train the number we assign them to train. So this will take a time to mature, to be ready to implement fully for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and the same as to the conscript as well. So not only cadre, but the other thing is about the weapons. A lot of weapons such as anti-tank weapon, UAV, unmanned autonomous vehicle, and anti-air like a Stinger. Right now, based on the study, beside the anti-tank, such as UAV and anti-air, the units right now, they're still not fully equipped. So they still need the alternative in place to train those soldiers when those weapons are not fully filled in the units.
Also, I wanted to add an additional note to this discussion on the reserve and the conscript reform in Taiwan. After discussing with some of our Taiwan partners, we also noted that the increased demands on the conscripts and the reservists also increases demand on the private sector, because that's where some of those people will be coming from, and it puts more demand on those on the companies or the firms in Taiwan, so that they would need to be out of work for longer. And so I thought that was an interesting part of the dialogue within Taiwan as they consider how to execute the reforms that Jay discussed.
Okay, so that covers the personnel, the facilities, the training for individual level, and also materiel. But what about the concept or the operational plan? Now, Jay, you mentioned that your study also included the Ukrainian lessons learned. How did that fit into this? Where did the subject of Ukraine come up?
From the Ukraine war, we understand Ukraine actually showed a very successful example of resilience in terms of their self-defense, and also how they utilize those anti-tank such as Javelin, anti-air, Stinger, and anti-ships to degrade or destroy the enemy forces. And this is a great lesson learned from Ukraine. And in the study, we are focused on the post-landing operation phase. We understand that the better we prepare ourselves to utilize those asymmetric warfare capability, can leverage us to against the enemy with a numerical advantage, and also they have a much better capacity to continue to send the force on shore. So this asymmetric warfare capability can impose unfavorable costs to the enemy to make them think twice. Are they willing to accept the cost? Because this war might not be quick and decisive for People's Liberation Army. This war have potential to be protracted. And how long we can protract the timeline, it depends on how well we prepare ourselves in hope of society resilience and how we adapt those asymmetric warfare capability.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to answer this question, Tom. I think the point I wanted to make, in addition to what Jay just said, was that Ukraine is essentially this laboratory that both the Taiwan'S as well as the People's Liberation Army are laser focused on right now. They're looking at the innovation, the new technology, the new tactics that the Russians and the Ukrainians are using against each other. The People's Liberation Army has institutes and various agencies within their organization that are specifically looking at how these new technologies are being leveraged, and then the People's Liberation Army is thus coming up with new countermeasures, new tactics, techniques, and procedures on how to counter those threats. And so you see this complex system of adaptation, countermeasures, all going on within Ukraine, but with both Taiwan and the People's Liberation Army looking at that problem and seeing how it would best fit their strategy.
So now, how are we applying these lessons learned? I mean, now that you've done the research and you've looked at how Ukraine has exercised resilience, what did it highlight perhaps additional changes that needs to be made in Taiwan's resiliency programs?
Additionally, to increase and to strengthen our whole society resilience and to have an open mind approach is important. The open mind approach is give us a capability to adapt to change. This open mind approach not only to our material solution, but also to non-material solution. Material solution, we focus on have an open architecture module to better incorporate new technology advancements such as AI and computing and UAV systems. For non-material solutions, we will focus on how we conduct mobilization, how we disperse our wartime stockpile, how we better train our mobilized recall forces, how we better train our conscript service, and how we incorporate those capabilities together in operationally to deliver the desired combat effect we want in the battlefield.
Okay, thanks. And Pete, what would you say is the U.S. takeaway in terms of supporting Taiwan? Does it change your security assistance profile in any way, or what?
I think in terms of the security assistance that the United States is providing to Taiwan, we are doing the right things in terms of the capabilities that we're looking at. Specifically, for our study, we looked at 3 principal capabilities: anti-landing ship capabilities, anti-armor capabilities, and air defense. Our theory or our assumption was that Taiwan needs to have capabilities to defeat a ground assault force that aims to seize Taipei urban areas and critical infrastructure rapidly in order to meet their strategic objectives for unification with Taiwan. And the People's Liberation Army wants to do this before potential third-party intervention, as well as any anticipated international sanctions. And so those 3 critical capabilities were critical for Taiwan to be able to develop before 2027, the date that the People's Liberation Army wants to be ready to conduct a potential cross-strait invasion. So going back to your question, Tom, what are the things that the United States could be doing better in terms of security assistance with Taiwan? Through our research, we determined that we're doing the right things, we're looking at the right capabilities, but we need to accelerate those capabilities or to develop new novel approaches on how to get those capabilities on island before 2027. For example, if the People's Liberation Army is preparing for a potential cross-strait invasion by 2027, some of our deliveries of key capabilities covered in our research won't be delivered until after 2028. That is certainly a significant amount of risk that Taiwan and potentially the United States takes on of not having those capabilities on island before 2027. We also were working with the assumption that those capabilities need to be on island before 2027, because if the People's Liberation Army undertakes that operation, the resupply or the security assistance that the United States would be able to provide and furnish to Taiwan would potentially be challenged by a People's Liberation Army blockade. So having those capabilities on island before 2027 is critical, and coming up with new ways to accelerate deliveries of systems that Taiwan has already purchased through foreign military sales or other mechanisms is incredibly important.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, how about takeaways for the U.S., such as recommendations for policy, independent of Taiwan? What are some broader takeaways that the U.S. Should realize?
Thanks, Tom, for the question. In terms of recommendations for U.S. policy, our research really looked at the Taiwan Security Cooperation Initiative within the National Defense Authorization Act of 2025 as a good starting point. From industrial-based cooperation to expanded opportunities for training between the United States and Taiwan, there are better pathways to accelerate the development of critical capabilities that Taiwan needs. However, more creative approaches should be sought and developed together between the United States and Taiwan as we continue to look at the problem.
So, what about your final takeaways? Like we've been asking about the sort of the U.S. and the Taiwan perspectives, but what about you personally, Jay? What are you taking away from this research project as you go back to Taiwan as a senior leader?
Thank you, Tom. As a graduate from Army War College and benefited from doing this research, focus on my home country's defense is very important for me and beneficial for me as well. So in the class, we learned from the Army War College the national preparedness, how the national preparedness needs, the policies can translate into military readiness. So in this project, we realized that national policies are important because policy can help to drive the guidance and allocate the resource required to drive the necessary change. So in the organizational change in Taiwan Armed Forces, it's important to know that a lot of policies from the studies we realized that it's not able to translate and realized at scale in time. It needs time to develop. But however, a lot of alternatives such we realize how the military can take an approach is to come up with alternative approach to train. For example, like P mentioned about a lot of delivery of the asymmetric warfare capability won't be able to deliver in time based on the 2027 scenario. However, in the study, we realized that Taiwan has done some significant approach to compensate those delays, such as anti-air weapon system training. We lack of anti-air stinger, but however, we develop a simulation systems to train our soldier in a construction service and for them to be ready in the time when they need to use it in the battlefield. So this approach is to compensate the weapon delivery delayed or the precious amount of stockpile we need to have in the wartime. And the other thing about the UAV is very, very predominant in the new type warfare. So Taiwan Defense Industrial Base is actually take an approach to have their homemade UAV system. So we have a UAV industrial park. And in the Army, recently we established a brand new UAV training center. Those establishments are coming from the resource allocated from the policy to better prepare our forces in this phase of operations.
And Pete, same question. What did you take away personally?
I think I took two major takeaways from this project with Jay. I think the first one, and probably the most important, is the criticality of perspective taking. By working with an officer from Taiwan, of interacting with officials from the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office in the United States, I really learned that in order to work closer with potential partners and allies in the Indo-Pacific region, we need to better understand the context behind their problem. We need to understand the interplay of how they see they will defend their island and have a better idea of how U.S. assistance and cooperation can better fit into that model. So I think in terms of perspective taking and the context by working closely with our partners, that can't be underscored enough. And I think the second major takeaway is for the United States to place increased emphasis and urgency onto how we are innovating and changing both our processes as well as our ways in which we are working with our allies and partners. The old way of sticking with certain processes or mechanisms is not fast enough. We're seeing on the battlefield of Ukraine that that adversaries are adapting, coming up with countermeasures at a very rapid pace. And the way in which we do security cooperation must keep ahead of that change in order to stay at the speed of relevancy.
Any final words, Jay?
Thank you, Tom. The dynamic nature of warfare means the enemy adapt to achieve its strategic goals. So when we're doing this project, we're looking on Taiwan itself. They conduct an organizational transformation to better prepare themselves in the post-landing operation by strengthening whole of society resilience. On the other side, this project also covers about how the U.S. security assistance to provide some principal capability focused on asymmetric warfare. So looking holistically together from Taiwan perspective, from U.S. perspective, how we can align the two approach and to achieve the desired combat effect we want in this phase operations is very important. So there's a lot of adaptive change and synchronization required. For example, the delivery timeline for principal capabilities from the U.S. and the principal capability developed by Homeland Defense Industry Base. Those timeline and those efforts should be aligned and should be coordinated across not only to 2027, but beyond 2027. On the other hand, our conscription systems, our reserve mechanism, and our civil defense mechanism has to be continued validated because the enemy is changing. We also need to better prepare ourselves how to utilize the key terrain and the principal capability, ensure our decisive success in the battlefield. So, looking to the future to better defend Taiwan, I think more coordination, more synchronization, not only domestically, but also with alliance partners. In this case, security assistance from the U.S. are very important. We need to take a look into there and have achieved a desired outcome.
Thanks for the final word, Tom. I think that the main takeaway or the final thing that I got out of this research project working with Jay is the tremendous opportunity that both of us as Carlisle scholars were afforded into really diving down deep into this problem, working with Dr. Jake Rinaldi of the China Land Power Study Center, being able to take a strategic problem, break it down into a very small, finite part, and to really dive down into the ways in which Taiwan is approaching the problem, the way in which the United States is supporting that effort, and the potential strategic recommendations that we can offer to both Taiwan and the United States into how we're working together. I think that's the biggest takeaway and what I will remember as part of this project and as a Carlisle scholar.
All right, and thank you, Jay and Pete, for a wonderful conversation, and congratulations on both completing the project and graduating from the Carlisle Scholars Program and the Army War College Resident Education Program for academic year 2025. And so with that, I thank you all for listening. This is Tom Galvin from the U.S. Army War College signing off.
And that concludes our program. Thank you for listening. The views expressed in this podcast reflect those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense. Let us know what you think. Provide us your feedback, comments, or suggestions through our webpage at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. And have a great day.